Good day to you. David Cohen here with you. We're here for two aims today. This is part of the 5-day peace challenge that we're starting this week, the week of June 16th. And this is also part of the Good Morning show that we're the podcast that we're doing now once a week. And I'm really thrilled to introduce you to a wonderful guest. His name is Jonathan Wilson. He's a writer, a speaker, and consultant, specializing in leadership that makes a lasting difference. Jonathan has an extraordinary background of life, senior executive, board, and consulting experience. It has taken him across continents and into radically varied environments, from remote tribes in the tropical rainforests to warlords and politicians in Africa, from nationwide multi-stakeholder projects to the boardrooms of global companies. His work has never been boring. Political mediation, socio-economic development, leadership development, business model innovation, and developing strategy for global organizations. The scarlet thread has always been leadership, the company as a leader in the market, the individual as an organization leader. Jonathan is the founder of a management consulting firm called Soul Systems, based in the GTA. And he consults to senior leaders in the areas of leadership effectiveness, strategy, business model improvement, and innovation, and large-scale transformational processes. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to see you on this hot day.
Yeah.
So we've seen disruption, anger, resignation, protests, and the like since March, mid-March. Where is our collective soul at, in your estimation?
Great question. Where's our collective soul at? I think there's a lot of jadedness right now, that people have seen a social and economic way of being that kind of sucks the soul dry. Where there is energy and interest in aspects of justice, that tends to have produced a lot of heat and less actual progress. And I think so for a lot of folk, it's the protests that we're seeing, I think, are partly a reaction to being shut down for 2 months, and couple that with a reaction to months, years, decades, centuries of ways in which some humans have shut other humans down. I think all of that is starting to come up to the surface in a reaction to people. I'm not seeing though, well, you are seeing pockets of the kind of creative, love-fueled creativity that's, rather than being driven by anger, is being driven by something more positive. And it's there, but it's not really showing up in such a way as to lead people further along.
Yeah, so if we were to explore some of this deeper meaning of what we're seeing and what's going on in the planet right now, what's the heart of humanity truly needing? What's that expression that we want to, that's inside us that wants to get out?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, in my own view, the human being is he's like the man, the woman that is on this planet is capable of actually reshaping how the planet functions. And that can be put to good ends, very often is put to negative ends, and sometimes that's just by sheer accident. That as we collectively do things, there's enough power in who we are that we don't intend negative outcomes, but they come. And so I think, in a way, this time that we've been through is actually a good time to pull back and say, have I been just trying to live the good life, get my job, get my income, pay my bills, or do I want to be part of something that's actually much more intentional about the kind of social environment that we're creating together, the kind of political governance that we're exercising, and the way we relate to one another and to the natural world?
Yeah, that's my hope too.
Yeah.
Now, your work in leadership and writing and speaking and consulting, you talk a lot about soul.
Yeah.
It's in the name of your company. What does it look like when organizations, government, companies begin to lead with soul in mind.
That's really the whole idea of soul. When I put that into my branding, was to capture this idea that we are not trying to, we're not individuals who are trying to maximize simply our personal outcomes, maximize wealth, that we actually have a deep center to who we are. And whenever, for example, whenever a business is genuinely creating deep and sustainable value, typically that is coming from a place where the business is in touch with its soul. It is a place of depth and creativity that is informed by an empathic way of relating to their customer, to their customer's world. And so you have an operation that is operating from its soul. It's the deep stuff that is definitely going to be there in any given set of, people that have been put together in an organization. You will find passion, experiences that coupled together with the skills and the knowledge that they have, that's where all the creativity will come from that produces the value that they can bring to people. And I'll give you a quick illustration. Like a few years ago, I had to work with a number of scientists who, well, as you know, the academic world is a pretty tough one to get into. And so here were scientists where the academy was a limited option for them. And there were lots of openings in the marketplace in businesses that were looking for research scientists and so on. And they despise business. They don't want to go there. They want to be pure scientists. And yet in my working with them, one of the fun things was helping them to see that, well, you can kind of choose your company that you go into. It doesn't have to be a company that's greedy and extractive. And if you find a company where your science can actually bring stuff to life, that's magical. That was the one thing. But the other thing was to ask these scientists about their background, their experiences, their history. And I won't name countries or backgrounds, but there were scientists who came from countries where their families or entire peoples that have experienced profound systemic oppression. And so I'd say, so tell me, you're a scientist. You sound like you care about justice. You sound like you care about a society that flourishes with freedom, with liberty, with human rights being in place. Is that correct? And he'd say, yes, that's, I saw the opposite of that. It's like, well, don't you think that you can use your science to make a better society, a more just society? Isn't there a way that you can bring your science to bear? And the business place might actually be the sector where you can bring that most to life, because it's the business sector that's actually trying to make innovative things happen, in the world. So it was interesting to see some of the scientists kind of switch their paradigms as to where they thought they'd want to exercise, leverage their soul, so to speak.
I like that. And we do have a choice. And I think you mentioned business and small business. We have that power to make that difference and to create products and services and, that are going to shape humanity for the better. Can leading by heart and soul contribute to peace, not only in the boardroom, as you allude to in one of your talks, but also to peace on the planet?
I think it can. And obviously, peace on the planet is going to be, to use a different meaning of the word peace by peace. It's not something that will somehow suddenly spread across in some massive way. It's each of us doing our part. And the way that I see that playing out in business is not only businesses being socially responsible or community focused, which I think are both very valuable things. I think, or treating their employees in a just and a fair way. Those are all things that will contribute to peace. But I think it's actually how you think about competition. So,
okay.
basically, in a nutshell, what I help my clients get their heads around is, if your approach is to the competitor is that your job is to beat them, to give them a good thrashing and to push them out of the market or whatever it might be,
Right.
then basically the kinds of tactics you're going to have to engage in will both corrode your own soul, but they actually have destructive effects within the marketplace itself. And they can, drive up prices in a way that's not helpful. There's all kinds of ways that it can have a negative knock-on effect. However, if your view of the competitor is, the competitor is there to keep me on my toes, the competitor is there to make sure that I do what I'm good at, not that I try and mimic them or beat them at their game. If we're both doing our job right, the market needs both of us.
Yes.
And if we haven't figured out why we're different to them, that's just because we haven't done the job of properly differentiating ourselves.
Yeah.
The more we understand our differentiation, I think the more we understand what competition really is about. It's not about eliminating other people or beating them. It's about each of us finding our sweet spot and delivering value from that sweet spot. And so that in itself is a very tangible way of bringing a much healthier dynamic to society rather than an oppositional dynamic. It's a iron sharpens iron dynamic.
Yeah, and we're starting to see a little bit of support now for small business owners, because they've been so rocked by what's going on. Main Street has been closed for 3 months. It's only now starting to open, and you're seeing a lot of consumer support for Main Street small businesses.
Yes.
As opposed to the big behemoths like Amazon and those sort of companies. What's your take on that? Do you think this is something that kind of shift, that we'll see more of that we'll go back to maybe a return of honoring the small business owner, the dreamer, the creative person, the person that when they're starting out feels that they can make an impact and change the world?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from a sociological perspective, and I'll speak cynically first, that is there a chance we're just going to slip back into the old ways? As I said before the interview, there's a rut that the pandemic has kind of bumped us out of the rut, but we're still close to the rut. We could slip back in. I think that's still possible. However, before the pandemic hit, there's been several years where there's been a talk about the value of the local business, that you actually get more quality from the local business, that it's more targeted to the community, more meaningful, that it's actually lower cost because you don't have these massive supply chains that are trying to bring cheaper goods in. It's healthier for the environment if you're talking about food production. So those conversations have all been going on. I think what the pandemic did is, because it forces everyone to stay at home, it actually means you literally become more locally focused. It happened in our home. When the pandemic hit, we set up a system with our two boys who are teenagers. And we said, we want you to do chores every day. That's going to help our house function. Half an hour of chores every morning for each of you. And if you do those chores successfully for X many days in a row, then we're going to patronize a local restaurant. And you'll be the recipient. You're going to get the reward of some meal or whatever that we get taken out from a local restaurant. And we had to talk through, because they immediately wanted to go, to the chains or whatever. It's no, we're going to work. This is a win-win where you get a reward and the local restaurant gets some money, some cash injection just from our one little family. I suspect that there's other families who are thinking the same way. If we can find a way post-pandemic to localize ourselves more, so that everything from what businesses we access to who we have friendship with, as opposed to 100 people scattered across the world on Facebook, that's great. But if I'm putting most of my relational energy there, and I've got neighbors that I could be getting to know and build strong local relationships with, so when there's crisis, we're there for each other. There's so much that would happen if we allowed our focus to become local while the internet allows our awareness to remain global.
Right. You know, you're taking a page out of a thought that I've been, thinking about for several weeks, and that is that, if we are to have world peace and, a little bit more harmony, that it starts local. It starts by community, and you get one community strong, and you build that model throughout other communities, and then it grows. It's not going to happen in one fell swoop. So I agree with you about the community idea and making community strong, and I think that's really the key to moving forward.
Yeah.
That there's opportunity, there's economic development, that there's good healthcare, that we're supporting kids in the community. So if you're like a business owner and or you're head of an organization and they're watching maybe today, what do they need to keep in mind to bring maybe peace on earth, or at least in their work environment?
Yeah. I think like I look, for example, at what's going around what's going on around us socially right now, and the polarization, the sense that if we're going to have a conversation about this issue, there is no conversation unless the starting point is that you agree with me. Well, I find that individuals within companies are coming in and they're bringing all that fear with them from the larger social milieu that we're part of. And they need an environment where their leadership sets up a space where it's okay to have difficult conversations, where you're going to be gracious with each other. You're looking for insight and truth from each other. And it might be that you have to start with just talking about business, but allow for diversity, for conflicting perspectives, but by agreeing that we're in this together and we are committed to each other before we're committed to our ideas. And then actually, I would love to see companies start to move away from that sense of, anything slightly controversial or difficult, like political conversations, social conversations, they don't belong in business. No, they do.
They do.
and to
bring ourselves to the company or the organization. Right?
That's right. So we need to, it's part of who we are, and our business is invariably, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, our business is engaging with a world that is deeply concerned about social issues. And so we need to allow those conversations within our own companies, but we need to create the safety. And there's a word not often used in our ordinary business worlds, but it's a world that primarily comes out of Christian tradition. It's the word grace. And grace at its core really means like an undeserved generosity, that whether or not you think somebody deserves your generosity, you give it to them. And what that allows for just creates much more breathing room, for having progress with each other, for actually hearing each other, not just judging each other. And so I don't usually use the language of grace, but it's one of the things that I encourage or try and foster or facilitate the clients that I work with, is to create that kind of spirit of grace within their working environments.
It's funny, I do a gratitude journal every day. And I thank, the universe, God, whatever, for grace, Right. If I hadn't, yesterday was a great day, and so I thank you for that grace. Thank you for that goodness,
Yeah.
You mentioned, fear, and fear is going to come into the workplace where, people might be a little bit traumatized once this is kind of said and done. And there's a lot of uncertainty on the planet right now. There is peace and there is grace and there is comfort when you're in the moment of life, when you're just here now, and you're not looking too far back, and you're not looking too far ahead. In one of your keynotes, Jonathan, you take on how we can respond to fear. So for those, again, watching or listening, fear can totally debilitate you.
Yeah.
What do we need to know in order to lead or do life or work a business with fear chipping in.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Well, and it's I've been writing it about been writing about it again in recent months.
Wow.
To really encouraging leaders to slow down and recognize that what fear is doing is it's putting them in a tunnel. And I tell a story which you'll recall from that talk.
Yeah.
Where you're afraid, where I was caught in an earthquake. I was 19 at the time, and whether you're 19 or 90, I think an earthquake is just one of the most terrifying things you could experience.
Yeah, it's like, what the heck's going on? You know?
Yeah, and so we ran for our lives, and without going into detail of that story, what that really showed me is that there's a place for that kind of fear, which just gets you out of the danger.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble is, so it gives you laser focus. I need to get out of this, and I need to get out now, and the adrenaline is driving you to move fast. That's fine when your life is in immediate danger, but the same dynamics of fear can show up at times where actually the tunneling effect that they create, the sense of urgency that they create is actually detrimental. It's working against what we need to do. And so that's why I've been encouraging leaders to slow down and to actually put into proportion what's coming at them, because very often their fear is causing things to be outsized. And so to say, you still have a house, you still have your friends, you still have food on your table. And maybe they've lost their house, but there's still a way of bringing proportion to how they're looking at the world, and start to scale down the stuff that is freaking them out, and start to scale up to proper proportion the good that they already have in place. And so that's one thing that I've been encouraging people to do, is to get a sense of proportion with their employees, again, to create the safety, just to have the conversations, to be compassionate with people who are afraid when maybe you're not afraid anymore.
Right.
And that 6 feet really is far enough, between two people, but the person in the supermarket wants to keep it at 12. Well, rather than judging them, be compassionate. They're afraid. And so it's the same kind of thing, as there needs to be a compassion, a patience with each other at a time of high fear. But as I say in the talk, you want to be getting proportion. You want facts. You want to know that your friends are around you. You're going to reach out to them. They'll be there. And then also the foundations. And that's really looking backwards and saying, the future's unclear. The present's kind of unclear. But if you're an adult, you've got years behind you. You've got your culture has a history behind it that we can look into and say, where does wisdom come from? There's thousands of years of wisdom in the human race. Let me pull on some of that right now.
Sure.
People have been through this before, even
Yeah.
if I haven't. So, those are some of the things I think are important.
I also heard gratitude too. Like you didn't say it, but there's a gratitude towards being thankful for where we're at and what we have right now. What we have to contend with. And it's funny. I was on a walk last week, and my neighbor's kid was out walking their dog, and he's a teenager. He's more mature, and we were talking about the times we're in. I said, yeah, you watch, 2,000 years from now, they'll be reading about us in the Bible, So. How did they do it? Yeah. So, Jonathan, what organizations, companies that you're working with, who's doing well at leading with soul, courage, and heart?
Who's doing well? Well, I have seen, as the pandemic has unfolded, companies who lead from the place of fear, they act from the place of fear. So it's, furloughing people ASAP, cutting down cash flow, cash expenditure, which is obviously a very important discipline, but in such a way as isn't accounting for the little people in the organization, the vulnerable ones, the ones that, you know, when you've got a C-suite that has multiple cottages, boats, and whatever, and they take their 20% cut, but somebody's furloughed and they have nothing once they're furloughed except, you know, unemployment insurance. And so there's not an equity there, you know, in how those decisions are being made. And yet, on the other hand, I know companies that right from the beginning pulled their employees in. They said, this is how we're going to need to survive, and basically said, let's work out together how we're going to figure our way through this in a way that is disciplined fiscally, but keeps us all in as well as possible. And one of the commitments that one company made was to work out a plan to pay back anybody whose salaries they had to cut, mm-hmm. or who they had to furlough. Because of course, when you got furloughed, you might get your job back, but in that intervening period, if all you had was employment insurance, you might have been earning a fraction of what you earned at the company. So, yeah. So, you know, those are the kinds of companies I think they're operating from their soul. And when they do that, it feels counterintuitive because they're setting themselves up, you know, to pay people back, for example. And that feels like crazy risky. But what they're actually doing is they're building an environment of high trust, of high ownership, of high loyalty. Now imagine the kind of creativity, problem solving, customer service that you're going to get out of employees that you treated like that, right? So that's, you know, there's been the negatives examples and there's been those positive examples these recent months.
Yeah. You know, you say on your website that profit makes for a healthy goal, but a weak purpose.
Yeah.
The self-serving company ultimately fails. Where do we need to put our priorities moving forward as we head into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question I'm having with clients right now, which is, you know, there's in a sense two horizons that you've got to be thinking about. There's a longer horizon, which is, or let's start with a shorter horizon. The shorter horizon is, you know, where do we want our business to be 2 to 3 years from now? But if that's all we're thinking about, we're just going to keep lurching from milestone to milestone without making much of a difference. But if our longer horizon is, especially post-pandemic, is what kind of new future do we want? And how can our business help make that happen? Well, and then we, you know, sort of reverse engineer back from that long-term horizon and say, okay, well, if that's the kind of change that we want to drive in the next 2 or 3 years, these are kind of shifts we're going to need to make as a company. These are the kind of capabilities that we're going to need to build in to ourselves as a company. And by defining that long-term horizon, you can know whether those shifts are working or not. And then you can pivot along the way saying, well, we want to achieve a change, for example, in how the hospital system works, mm-hmm. or in terms of the technologies that it uses and the way, or the you know, the systems of how patients are allocated bed space, or, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You know, there's hallway medicine that they want to get rid of, right?
So all kinds of ways that you can anticipate your business is going to help a shift happen in that sector. And so, but it might take you 2 to 3 to 4 years, even 5 years to really get to a place where you're making that shift happen. Now's the time to be thinking about that.
Yeah, I love it. Anyone can be a leader. Rosa Parks is an example. So is Canadian Viola Diamond, who graces our $10 bill with her story of anti-racism and taking a stand of courage. If someone watching, listening right now, Jonathan, they're watching right about now and they feel they need to step it up, right? And maybe step it up and step out and take on a cause that matters to them. What advice or words of encouragement would you give them to sort of start?
Yeah. Well, I saw something today, I think it was today or yesterday, about when it comes to engaging a cause like Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. and saying, if you want to be a hero, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. You know, that's not social change. in an issue like Black Lives Matter around racism is not going to arise because I become this activist hero. We don't need more heroes in that sense. You know, high profile, you know, they've got their Twitter account, thousands of followers because this guy's saying some good stuff about racism or whatever it might be. We need people who behave differently. And so I think it is a time for saying, what kinds of changes do we need as society? And then for saying, rather than saying and getting angry and frustrated because there's these large systemic issues that I can't make any difference in, like government legislation. Now I can vote for my MP, or I can sign a petition of some kind, and those are all good things when the time comes. But true change is not going to happen in these areas until in our own sphere of influence, we make intentional changes. And so I'm very much a big believer in the first port of call when it comes to social change is what we do in our own local environment. It's if we get into a local activist community, or we're part of a local church that wants to do something in our neighborhood, then it becomes tangible. Then we can actually tackle things that are at where we can actually make solutions happen, because it's within our sphere of influence. And if we gather our friends around us, we can make changes in our own neighborhood, our own municipality, or maybe it's a bunch of business leaders who can introduce changes within their own industry. But we've got to choose the environment in which we can make a difference, not sit there and simply think that our anger or our protesting by putting certain memes on Facebook is going to somehow move entire systems to change, like federal government legislation or something. There's places and ways for engaging all of that. But boy, I would love to see more people just take seriously, what can I do in how I run my business? What can I do in how I treat my neighbor? What can I do in terms of what I lobby my municipal councilor to pay attention to? If we could focus on those things, can you imagine? I mean, in my town of 50,000 people, if just 10,000 of those were actively engaged in building justice within our community, I think something pretty impressive would happen.
I would too. And I like what you're saying, because what I'm hearing you also say is that, you know, talk is great, action is way better.
Yeah.
You know, we need to act. Whatever the cause is, whatever, you know, look, you don't want to go too big and you know, oh, I got to change the world and I'm, you know, I'm going to be this guru. No, it's not about that. It's just like, take on the kind of change that matters to you and do it in increments, right?
Yep. Amen to that.
Yeah, Jonathan, I really thank you for this. Where do we reach you? And do you have anything coming up you wanted to share that our listener and watcher or whatever can tap into?
I don't have anything coming up in terms of workshops or anything like that.
Darn.
This is I'm still in that sort of emerging from restrictions, trying to be responsive to clients and so on kind of mode.
Yes.
But I continue to write at leadbysoul.com, which is where I try and kind of, it's not so much, I have another site, which is my consulting site, that's soulsystems.ca. But at leadbysoul.com, this is not a site where I'm trying to pump, profile my business. It's a site that's there to serve people through just giving them resources to think about leadership and their own lives and the difference that they're seeking to make. So I'd encourage people to keep going there. I am hoping to produce a book in the coming months or year.
Okay.
So, there's lots bubbling, but I won't make promises on too much of that yet.
I hear you. I know. And what I find is like, whatever you're wanting to do, it seems to take forever. I don't know, like something happened to the time-space continuum throughout.
Right.
Yeah, I really thank you. And it's always a joy.
Yeah.
That was Jonathan Wilson. And this is part of the 5-Day Peace Challenge and also the Good Morning Show. Thank you for tuning in. Have a beautiful day.